why don't we do our Academy 101 segment? Tonight, our Academy 101 segment is going to cover how does Scanning Officer affect your resources? All right. Welcome back to our Academy training segment. We are going to be discussing the Scanning Officer, how it affects your resources, because it gets rid of them. So it does technically affect your resources, and what you should be doing to play with it. The reason I wanted to have it is because there were some questions that kind of came up in pre-release and during pre-release weekend. And I thought what would be a good idea is let's have a short little segment where we could talk a little bit about what Scanning Officer does, how you're allowed to rearrange your resources, what you're not allowed to do, and the official clarification from AMG. Alex, tell me, what does Scanning Officer say on their card?
So Scanning Officer is a 2-cost, just green unit. It's for 2/3. It's an Imperial and an Officer, which we said is lovely. When played, you reveal 3 enemy resources. Defeat each resource with Smuggle keyword revealed that way. For each resource defeated this way, the controller puts the top card of their deck into play as a resource. And remember, anything that comes into play, especially resources, they come in exhausted. So if you manage to defeat some of theirs, you actually like gimp them for that turn.
Yes, and that's exactly why this came up, is because people were upset that you could take a readied resource and essentially make it exhausted, right? So the first question that kind of came up is, can you rearrange your resources at any time? All right, well, that's a valid question, I guess. The second question is, can you change which resources are ready and which are exhausted at any time as long as you keep the same count of spent resources? The third question that kind of came up is, may I shuffle my ready and exhausted resources together, let Scanning Officer resolve, and then put the remaining resources back as I choose, as long as I maintain the exhausted state of spent resources? So the idea behind this, and the reason this question came up, is because Scanning Officer replaces the resource, like Alex said, right? Like, you get a resource that comes in if any of the smuggled ones are discovered. Then you might not want one of your resources to be exhausted if it is defeated. Therefore, you want to be able to shuffle them. They also one of the reasons that kind of came up was, can I shuffle them so that I have a chance of them not hitting the smuggled card when it's defeated? Another reason that I was given was, if I cannot shuffle them, then being able to put my smuggle resources as exhausted, even if they were not previously exhausted, prevents me from getting another exhausted resource, right? Sorry, that's an extra thing. That's why this card is actually above curve for 2 costs. This is a very above resource cost card. Anyway, long story short is, let's go around the room. JJ, what do you think? Do you think you're able to shuffle all your resources, both ready, not ready?
So I mean, we did have something similar come up in my in one of my events that I went to for pre-release, where the question had come up to the TO if they can look at their resources to arrange them before they were spent, so that way it's just easier for them to choose a smuggle card when they're going to deploy it. So that way they're not wasting time searching through all their decks, because multiple times there were times where, some players had resourced about, 10 to 11 different resources, and they're like spending time flipping cards, and, the opponent would get a little upset because they felt like they were wasting time, going through their hand constantly, to pull out smuggle cards. And the THUD had stated that, yes, they can, as long as they are not taking additional time in delaying the game. They can essentially arrange their resources to before like the round goes on, to allow us their section of smuggle cards that are resourced to be put like arranged to the left, and the other ones, or the rest of them arranged next to them, as long as all the resources were visible to the opponent, so that way they can see how many resources they had available to spend during that turn. So in the spirit of that, I would say, yeah, they could technically shuffle it. I mean, I don't see the reason why. I mean, especially if you're trying to do it randomly. I mean, if the card itself doesn't allow for you to take a look at the resource so that way you can choose, then it should be random at that point. So at that point, you can gather the affected resource cards and shuffle them, and then just do one randomly at that point. So that's how I would believe it would be interpreted. So yeah.
Alex, what do you think?
I mean, I do judge a lot of events. It's hidden information. You can shuffle it as long as you're not like delaying the game more. But when your opponent plays a scanning officer, I have no reason to believe you wouldn't be able to shuffle your cards. I would also recommend not making it immediately obvious that you, one, have smuggle cards, or two, which one they are. Going against your opponent for that, but that's on you at that point.
Fair enough. All right, so the FFG rules document says the order of cards in a player's resource zone does not need to be maintained. A player may rearrange those cards at any times. Hence why this actually became a bigger question, because people were like, well, I should just be able to shuffle them so you don't know which ones they are. So Tyler, one of the developers, actually said, no, players can reorganize their resources as they want, but the ready resource status of each individual resource cannot be changed. So you could say, I want the card you so you cannot say, I want the card you resourced round 2, but you could grab exclusively any of the ready resources. So to answer the large looming question, yes, you can shuffle these cards at any time you want, but you got to keep them separate. So if you've got 5 resources, let's say, and you've got 2 exhausted and 3 ready, you cannot rearrange them at any time. Like, you cannot go, well, I'm going to take these 2 unready ones and stick them over here and move 2 other ones over there. You cannot do that. This also prevents you from being able to do that, right? So that basically if you have a card that you were going to play that's smuggled, and you're like, well, I really want to be able to exhaust a smuggled resource to be able to play my card, blah, 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 to bring one in. You can't, you just can't do that. If you accidentally already smuggled, you got to use another resource. To answer the second question, no, you must keep them separate. You cannot intermingle them. They are not allowed to intermingle. They have to be maintained separate. To answer the third question, no, they must remain in the same game state and only be shuffled in their groups. So, if I play Scanning Officer and Alex has got 5 resources, Alex has the right to shuffle them, but he's got to shuffle both piles separately. I would say now we could kind of talk a little bit about what's like better, like what's better game state, right? Rules or logic, and then what's actually better as an individual to play. I don't know, Alex, if you're playing, are you gonna put your smuggle cards exhausted first? Or are you going to play mind games with people and just be like, you get to pick and figure out which ones they are?
I mean, it's effectively random either way, right? So just I'll go ahead. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah, like it's I mean, I guess if I know they have Scanning Officer and I know I'm not going to use literally every single resource, I might exhaust one of my smuggle cards I'm intending on playing that turn. But that's like a lot of effort for something that's like, I don't know. Yeah, it sucks that you played it. It is what it is.
Yeah. And I think if we see more Scanning Officer, this rule is going to become a bigger question. And the reason I wanted to cover it tonight is because we saw this in pre-release. Now that we're through the first weekend of Set 2 release, this is going to become a thing. I run a lot of Scanning Officer. I don't know about anybody else, but I like to run Scanning Officer quite a bit. And that's because I like to mess with people's resources. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was more interested in this question and rules clarification from FFG. So logically, it's kind of up to you. JJ brought up at the beginning, through his example, he said, hey, they wanted to know, can they put all of their smuggle cards on the left and their non-smuggle cards on the right? Absolutely. But if you're a good player and you figure out that somebody is doing that, I'll tell you what, when you play a smuggle card, I pay attention to where you played it from. If you play a smuggle card from the right-hand side, I'm probably going to that right-hand side more often. If you play 2 from the right-hand side, I'm definitely choosing that because somebody thought it was a good idea to put all their smuggle cards on the left. I will tell you what I personally do. I just play the cards down personally, and I don't care, and I just peek at them. I set my cards aside. That's my deck, and I put a little token on it, and if I want to look to see if I have smuggle cards, I do it. And Tanner is the crazy guy that will look at his cards even if he doesn't have smuggle cards in there on purpose. And I did that during pre-release more than one time. And somebody played a skating officer on me and it didn't do anything. I was like, I don't have any smuggle cards. He's like, why were you looking at your cards? In case you play skating officer. And he's like, that's a dick move. And I was like, well, I'm just saying, like, I mean, you still got a 2/3 unit on the board, whatever. Like, I mean, it didn't do anything for you. But anyway, so I think it's a good thing to know. And I wanted to make sure people were aware of what the interactions were, so you knew if you went into tournaments coming up. I know we're gonna have Store Champs. We got Gen Con coming up. There's gonna be more tournaments coming up, especially as they start releasing their actual organized play schedule for tournament structures in the next coming months. I wanted everybody to know about this. Either way, thank you all for joining us for our Academy 101 segment.